the other class, so she's welcome to come up here and pick it up. Because we obviously have a truncated period today with just half the time that we would normally have been scheduled due to the weather-related issues in your exam, I'm going to be moving at a little bit of a faster pace than I would like to, so if I really lose anybody, please feel free to shout out. But we do have to cover some of their representatives were using bribes, actually, to get excessive profits to win business overseas. So just as pharmacies get involved in these issues, so does the pharmaceutical industry. The next was another example of the pharmaceutical industry in which some Glaxo personnel bribed physicians in China to prescribe their products preferentially. And in fact, they gave things like free trips and that sort of thing, which used to be done in the United States as well, although it's less done today because the AMA and other organizations have come out strongly against that kind of thing. Another example there talks about Walgreens paying $500,000 to settle a suit in San Diego County in which their pharmacists were found in the Walgreens pharmacies there to be routinely not providing counseling, as was required by the California State Board regulations. Another example there, the last one, talks about a compounding pharmacy, and there have been many examples of these, but here's one in Alabama. There was a more celebrated case in New England that you probably heard about, where they were giving out contaminated TPN solutions to hospitals. So there's a lot of examples of what we would refer to as unethical and in some cases illegal activity. Then it talks about these events in American society that show that have brought about a heightened awareness for concerns about ethical behavior. The Watergate case is an old case that even predates perhaps some of you, I don't know, but that sort of initiated the whole idea. And the interesting thing about the Watergate case, if you remember that whole episode and President Nixon having been trying, the problem came up because of cover-up. If he had sort of admitted to the problems right from the beginning, there would have been less of a problem. But because they tried to cover it up, it led to a greater problem. And sometimes that's how you can get into more trouble. But one item I do want you to be aware of is this issue of Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. You may have never heard of that term, but I do think we need to be familiar with it. And what it had to do with was there was a company a few years ago, a major energy company in the South, that went bankrupt because they were, to use sort of an expression, they were cooking the books. They were pretending that they were doing much better than they really were. And the accounting firm that was supposed to be auditing their books was sort of going along with this. They were part of the conspiracy. So ultimately the whole thing collapsed, as it usually does in cases like that, and the company went out of business, and a lot of people lost their retirement income and a lot of other things. So this led to Congress enacting this Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, which is described here, and I'll let you read that on your own, but basically what it says is that you have to certify that your auditors in a major corporation, whether the corporation be CVS or whatever, be totally independent, or even for a smaller pharmacy, that the auditors in hospitals too be independent. Now this legislation, as it explains here, technically only applies to companies that are public companies, in other words, listed on the public for-profit stock exchange. But many nonprofits, including universities and hospitals, have adopted the policies of Sarbanes-Oxley to make sure that there's auditor independence in monitoring their finances. So then it talks about how the economic crisis, or the so-called downturn or recession that lasted from 2008 for about 7 or 8 years, we've just recovered in recent years from that, was really the result of many unethical kinds of practices that related to, for example, banks giving out mortgages for profit to people who clearly didn't have any hopes of being able to really pay those mortgages. And it was also related to corporate greed, to excess salaries for CEOs in some cases, and to those kinds of issues that really led to that economic downturn that affected everybody. So at the bottom of the page, it shows some of the disciplinary actions that are taken by U.S. boards of pharmacy. And so these are the kinds of disciplinary actions that we want to avoid when we all have pharmacy licenses. Some of the punishments for violations include revocation of license, fines, and things of that sort. And being denied renewal of your license, and even being denied initial license if there's things on your record that are problematic. So we have to protect our license. That's sort of the bottom line. And then on the top of page 6, it tells about some of the reasons for getting these disciplinary actions charged against us. What are some of the things we do wrong as pharmacists that can get the state board to revoke or suspend our license? And it indicates, just to highlight a few of the important issues, breach of confidentiality, for example, which we know is a critical ethical mandate. Any conduct, as it says, evidencing ethical or moral unfitness. Having expired drugs in your inventory, for example, can get you into trouble. Failure to comply with patient consultation regulations, as we just pointed out in that San Diego case. Sexual misconduct in relationship to your professional work, or even something that would bring a big adverse publicity to you. Any violation, then it says, of federal or state regulations or laws, so you're obviously required in both directions to be in adherence with the law. That's part of ethics. Errors in dispensing can get you into trouble. Fraud, as is listed there. Criminal convictions, which can also lead to state board actions against you. And certainly the bottom line when they're alcohol and substance abuse. So those are some of the things that get us into trouble with the Board of Pharmacy. The next section deals with some ethical considerations related to the tightening job market that we're all familiar with for pharmacists. And again, I'm going to leave it to you to read that long paragraph there. But what it simply says is that the job market has tightened considerably since back in, up until about 2006. Companies were in here begging our graduating class to take jobs with sign-on bonuses and so forth. That's obviously not the case any longer. And that this is something that's a phenomenon throughout the United States, although there's some areas of the country that are tighter than others, but it's really something that is pretty national. And it indicates why many people are, for example, choosing to do residencies and fellowships, because this gives them a better shot at getting a job. Not a guarantee, but a better shot. And it talks about a publication that discussed this tightening job market. It was published in 2013. And I just want to point out the sort of one of the final observations of that publication about the tightening job market in pharmacy, which we know is due to an oversupply of pharmacy schools primarily. But it states that, quote, as you see underlined there, regardless of the job market, those new graduates who are fittest, and we use terms like you have to be competitive, and we want our students to be more competitive, and better, more competitive than other graduates, which in general our graduates are. But those who are fittest, as it says here, will be able to find employment. So our goal is to make sure that we're, competitive, or fittest, as they say here. What are some of the positive and negative implications of this changing supply-demand situation for pharmacists? Well, a potentially positive outcome, sort of looking for the silver lining in the cloud, is that this may force pharmacists to pursue expanded roles. This perhaps is forcing us to get more into roles that relate to direct patient care and things like that. That's why the various associations are pushing to acquire state by state and even at the federal level provider status. The goal of the provider status is to be more easily reimbursed from insurance companies for direct patient care services. But then there are some negative implications that relate to pharmacy education. And one of them has to do with the fact that it says here, the potential to reduce or compromise standards in pharmacy education. Well, there's no big secret that the applicant pool has diminished somewhat. There's fewer people somewhat for various reasons, the number of high school graduates and so forth, but I think clearly part of the reason is that the word is out that the job market isn't as lucrative as it used to be for pharmacists, so the applicant pool is diminishing. What that means is that this explosion of number of pharmacy schools, many of which are private schools and strictly tuition driven, are scrounging to fill their classes, because that's why they opened the schools in the first place. In many cases was basically for financial reasons. And what that means is that it's likely that there will be diminished standards for the students who get admitted into these schools because they're hurting for applicants. And that sort of goes against one of the ethical mandates in the Oath of Hippocrates, that for healthcare professions we need to be highly selective in terms of the students who are admitted. Certainly in this school that's what the practice is. Some other ethical implications and concerns related to the changing supply-demand situation in pharmacy is that pharmacists, and we illustrate this in some of the case studies, pharmacists as a result of this tightening job market have less clout than they once did. So if they want to say to an employer, hey, I demand that I have more pharmacy technician help, or that I not, have more time to be able to counsel patients, you got to realize that in this kind of a job market, your employer might say, too bad, if you don't like it here, we got 10 people waiting in line to take your position. So it sort of weakens the clout in that regard. We have to be cautious about that. So some of the best ethical and practical tactics for job seekers in a competitive job market for pharmacists and pharmacy students, this is good advice for all of us. First of all, is the bullet item says there, we have to be aware and be informed and be realistic. So we have to be prepared and adjust your approach and expectations accordingly. And I think we are all aware. We've made you aware all through the years that you've been here about the tightening job market. We also have to avoid waiting too long to focus on making arrangements for employment success. So you want to work on this as quickly as possible. If you're aiming for a residency or a fellowship, do what you have to do. You're ready to go into the P4 year. This is the time to do it. And just for your information, in last year's graduating class, about 15 to 20% of them did opt for a residency, did get a residency, and they're somewhat competitive to get as well. Another 15 to 20% got fellowships in the pharmaceutical industry, which is amazing that our since you're so successful in that very competitive area. So that covers, at least a third or more of our graduates going into those areas upon graduation. Another 20 to 30%, which would bring it up to about 2/3, had job offers when they finished. But there too, you got to be a little bit cautious and realistic, pardon me. Because some of the chains now, and I think some of you know this, what they're doing is that they're being a little more selective in to whom they will offer full-time positions. And so they're putting you on sort of as a floater or per diem for a while, and they watch who are good performers and who they want to keep on, and then they'll offer you a full-time position at some point. So these are some of the realities of the job market, but I think our people are very equipped to be quite. So on page 7, it says more of these advisories. Be sure you have the minimum job requirements. If you want to go into hospital pharmacy today, you have to have at least a year of residency. If you want to become a clinical specialist at all in these hospitals, you need a minimum of 2 years of residency training. So you have to be realistic about those. The way to get into industry is through these industry fellowships as well. You also have to maintain flexibility and not narrow your options excessively. You can't be too rigid in terms of geography. Now, a lot of people, would like to stay, for example, just as an example, in New Jersey. But if a company says, well, we have a position in Colorado or whatever, you might want to consider that and realize that in time you might be able to transfer back to a region in which you really want to live, or you have family or whatever ties. You also have to have some flexibility in terms of the types of jobs you will accept. You also have to have reasonable expectations as to salary and benefits in today's job market, because the salaries aren't expanding. They're still good, but they're not expanding to the same level that they had been during the period when there was not an oversupply of pharmacists. And in your interviews, you never want to really initiate discussion of, hey, what's the salary? Or how many vacation days do I get, or anything like that. Leave those topics unstated. You'll find out soon enough what the answers to those questions are. Network as much as possible rather than trying to go it alone. Be well prepared, obviously, for your interviews. Have your CV carefully updated, and know something about the companies you're interviewing with. Don't go in there, without having some good information about them. I think we need not talk about being addressed appropriately and that sort of thing. Be succinct in answering your questions. Avoid vague responses. Listen and don't interrupt when they're talking. Be conscious of your nonverbal communications. You don't want to be looking at your watch while the interview is going on. And another bit of advice is don't disparage past colleagues or even past professors, believe it or not. Undoubtedly, you may have some past colleagues or past professors or whatever who deserve being criticized, but the time to do that is not when you're having an interview, because they're going to say, well, if you're going to be that way in talking to us, you're going to be a chronic complainer if we hire you, and so then they won't hire you. And it's a good idea to follow up with a thank you note or an email or something like that. We want to talk a little bit about licensing, because one of the things you can do to make yourself as competitive as possible in the job market is to get your license as fast as you can after you graduate. And we want to talk about licensing, which has in fact an ethical basis. And some of these issues related to licensure, the technical issues, do come up in questions on the MPJE exam that you have to pass, in order to get licensed, in addition to the NAPLEX exam. So the work you'll be doing, and you should begin looking into this before you graduate so you'll be able to get licensed as quickly as you can, is the online application. So in New Jersey, I have the website there, but there are similar websites for whatever state you want to get your first license in. It's a good idea to begin to explore this well before you graduate so that you're familiar with it, because it is a little bit cumbersome. And you can look for something referred to. In your case, it'll be 2019, but the one that's on there now might still be the 2018 one, which will be virtually the same thing. But you'll want to look for the NAPLEX MPJE 2019 Candidate Registration Bulletin. You want to look for that Candidate Registration Bulletin for related to NAPLEX and MPJE. You will note that, that each state has some variations in this. Some of the ethical requirements then to get licensed, at least, and I'm going by New Jersey regulations, which are not too different in other states, is that you have to be a good moral character. Basically, this means that you have to be an ethical person. If you have character, this means that you are ethical and trustworthy, in other words, a moral person. So that's what I mean by the ethical basis for licensure. So in New Jersey, the New Jersey Administrative Code talks about the necessity of proof of character. And proof of character means that you have to submit evidence of character. And what that really means is, submitting evidence of character, is that you have to submit evidence that you have no lack of character, that there's nothing that says you don't have character. And part of that is the thing that you've done over and over again already, and that's authorizing the criminal background check. So ongoing requirements, and I say ongoing here because these are requirements to get your initial license, but they're also requirements for license renewal. You have to show, and these all relate to ethics, that you are not presently engaged in drug or alcohol abuse. And that would include things like DWI. DWI can get you into trouble in that regard. Next, you have to show that you have not been convicted of any violations of controlled substance regulations, any violations of controlled substance regulations. Next, that you have not been convicted of any laws or regulations pertaining to the practice of pharmacy. So even beyond controlled substances, any regulations related to the practice of pharmacy. You have to show that you're not convicted of any crimes involving what they call the term moral turpitude, not a word we use every day. That term turpitude refers to public scandal, that you don't have on your record any evidence of public scandal that might show up probably, actually, possibly in your criminal background check. And you have to show, and this would not apply to your initial licensure, but to renewals, that you're not currently suspended in any jurisdiction in terms of your licenses. The internship or approved experience pre-license practice experience hours in New Jersey are 1440. The numbers vary in other states. It can range anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 hours. In terms of college-accredited externship and clinical pharmacy clerkship experience, in all 50 states, they allow at least part of those hours, at least part in all states, to come from your APE rotations, the rotations you're about to embark in your P4 year. But in New Jersey, though in some other states, but certainly New Jersey is one, the APE hours that you do here in the school counts for the totality. So you don't have to worry about doing any extra hours in community or hospital pharmacies to get licensed in New Jersey. But you have to check with other states as to what their specific requirements are. And in other states like Pennsylvania, where they have some extracurricular hour requirements, you have to be registered in advance. Even if you've done it during the summers after your P1 year, you have to register in advance with the state to be sure that that pharmacy and that preceptor are cleared. On the last page of this outline, it talks about something you've done many times over and over again, the criminal background check. So I'm not going to go through that because I think you've done it. But if your criminal background check, when you apply, for your license, you'll have to do it again, shows any problems, that will delay your licensure. So in your case, since you've done it so many times, I doubt that you'll run into any problem. When should you submit your materials to the Board of Pharmacy? Well, as I mentioned, as soon as possible. You have to, though, give them your date of graduation. And the way you do that is that you have to submit a final copy of your official transcript. Now, you can't print your final transcript and mail it to them. It has to be sent by the university registrar. That's what we mean by the official transcript. And you don't want to have them send that until you've looked online to be sure that it shows your date of graduation, which is usually the Sunday before the university, before the College of Pharmacy convocation ceremony. It's usually on a Sunday. Like this year, it's on Mother's Day, it turns out. But you have to see that that date is on there stating that you have earned the PharmD degree. So when you see that on the transcript, you can have your official transcript sent to the board. Then it says, if you submit the application forms online to NABP before your final official transcript is available. Yes, you can do that. You can do that, and that may speed up the process of getting licensed. But you have to remember to send in the official transcript once it is available, because the State Board of Pharmacy will not release you to take the exams. You have to apply to NABP, National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, to take these exams. So you can do that before you actually have graduated, but the State Board in New Jersey, at least, will not authorize them to release the exams to you or give you clearance, to take the exams until they get the official transcript. So those are just some things that you need to worry about. Another bit of strong advice I would give you is to take what's referred to here as the pre-NAPLEX exam. There is a cost to this, and you can do it twice, but this pre-NAPLEX exam, which you can get through NABP, will supply you with 100 questions that you can take and practice to see how well you can do the questions on the NAPLEX. This is for the NAPLEX exam. And you submit it then to them, and they'll give you an evaluation as to whether you're really ready to take the NAPLEX or not. Now, I would advise that you don't do this until you've had some of your tougher clinically intense rotations in your P4 year, but at some point, you'll want to do that. You may want to do it after you've done some reviews and so forth related to the NAPLEX. You can do it twice, and the second one you would do gives you totally different questions, so it'll give you more experience at this. It's a good thing to do, even though it does cost some money. Where it says, is there a pre-MPJE? Unfortunately, no, there's not a pre-MPJE. And actually, that's unfortunate because our student pass rates, first-time pass rates, are higher for NAPLEX, believe it or not, than they are for MPJE. We had about a 96% first-time pass rate in the class that graduated this past September, or past May, I mean. So there were about 10 who took it who didn't pass it the first time, but we had a very good, it was much better than the national average, which was about 89%. There's another school in New Jersey, I can't remember their name, that their percent was 65%. So we beat them handily. And we were really better than all the schools in the area except two. And it's up to you to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. But there were two schools in Philadelphia, Temple and Jefferson, that very slightly were better than the 96% that we had. So you have your work cut out for you, I guess. Just some final. One final item has to do with score transfer, and score transfer has to do with this. When you take let's say you take the NAPLEX exam for New Jersey, fine. But you are angling, or you might get a residency in another state, or you might get a job in another state, or you might have to move to another state for whatever reason. You can have your score on the NAPLEX you take for New Jersey transferred to 2 or 3 other states. You have to do it in advance. You can't do it after the fact. I think you have to do it within a certain number of days, probably not within 90 days, so you have a bit of a window. Within 90 days of when you took the NAPLEX exam for state, for New Jersey. So give that some thought as to where you would want to transfer it. There's a bit of a fee with that, as there is with everything. You don't do that for the MPJE because if you have to get licensed in other states, they make you take pretty much, in most cases, the MPJE over again because the MPJE differs, as you know, from state to state. But finally, because I'm going to leave the last part unstated, and you can just think of that yourself, the rules that you may see come up on your MPJE exams related to licensure by reciprocation or transfer. As you know, you can hold licenses simultaneously in multiple states. And if you get licensed, let's say in New Jersey, you don't have to take the NAPLEX over again if you have to move at a later stage in your life to Ohio or to wherever. You can just transfer, reciprocate your license to the other state. Now, the rules related to that is that, first of all, you can't transfer, reciprocate your license before 1 year of practice in your initial licensure state. You have to have practice at least for 1 year in another state, in your initial state of licensure, before you can do it by reciprocation. You also have to prove that you've had recent practice experience, recent significant practice experience. And some people get into trouble because they've worked, nothing wrong with that, but they've worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and that doesn't count as practice experience. It's not, practitioner based. But you won't have to repeat the NAPLEX. You will probably have to take the MPJE. So with that, we've finished the material from last time. I will give you 2 outlines for next time. So we want to get into the very important illustrations of ethics, dealing with the 5 case studies for each class. And so the 5 case studies today are on the yellow sheet, which I hope you pick up. And Dr. Kuzma is going to call up the teams. Now, he's been very thoughtful. Dr. Kuzma is a very, very thoughtful guy, and he saw people having to write notes, holding it up against the board last time, so the people up here who are on the teams, he's put up seats and tables for you. See, I wouldn't have thought of that myself. So, the teams can get up here, take a seat, and that way, you know, you'll still be able to state, you know, how you would deal with these cases, but you'll be able to write down.
Blurry.
So, case number 1. Case number 1.
Okay, so case 6.
That's number 6. I'm sorry. Case 6.
We have Valerie Burma, Julius Elberfeld, Nimit Jindal, Somaya Mulapudi, Tasna Maroni, Jasmine Sai, and Andy Su.
So please check in with Dr. Kuzma and then take your seats up here.
And then while you're taking your seats at the tables, please fill in the middle seats first so that people can get in more.
Does anybody have any extra blank yellow sheets? Is there any extra blank yellow sheets? There you go. Why don't you get that? All right, are there 2? We need 2. We need 2 yellow sheets. Hey, there's enough there. Just grab them. I'll print a few extras. Thank you.
Oh, shoot.
Okay.
Good job.
Who wants to read the case? Who's going to volunteer to read this case? Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll have to get a microphone, okay? All right, there we go.
Hello? According to an article in the Daytona Beach News Journal, 34-year-old Stephen Porter died in 2011 after taking a combination of Xanax and hydrocodone. His mother filed a negligence lawsuit against her son's doctor, the pharmacy, and the pharmacy's owner. The doctor settled out of court. The pharmacy was accused of filling at least 30 prescriptions in a 2-year span, even though it should have known that the previous prescriptions had not been depleted. Lawyers for the pharmacy argued that it had no duty to Mr. Porter other than filling valid and lawful prescriptions. Circuit Judge William A. Parsons agreed with the pharmacy and dismissed the case. On appeal, the appeals court recently ruled that Daytona Discount Pharmacy and its owner, Manish Patel, should stand trial for the overdose death of a patient who filled his anti-anxiety and painkiller prescriptions at the pharmacy. Should a pharmacy or pharmacist be liable for filling valid and legal prescriptions? Pharmacy industry observers are watching closely as that answer is likely to be provided by a Florida court. The issue will be explored in more detail later in this series of bioethics lectures. Discuss the ethical and legal issues involved here as we see them.
Just pass the microphone down and let anybody who wants to comment on what their reaction to this case is. Let's have your comments, okay?
Okay.
General comments, and I'll summarize the notes because we have limited time today. I'll summarize it after everybody has their chance to make a comment.
Well, I think it's fine because they filled a valid, lawful prescription, but at the same time, the pharmacist should be assessing or has a responsibility to assess the health and welfare of the patient. So I think it's ethically wrong, but legally correct.
Okay. Obviously, there was some disagreement in the courts, though, because the one court agreed with the fact that the pharmacist had no additional duty than to get the right pills into the bottle, but then the appeals court seemed to have a different view. Go ahead.
I agree with Somya. I think it's a difficult case to discuss, but I think that the pharmacist should be held liable to some degree because it is somewhat negligent.
Okay.
Well, I would say, as part of a professional obligation is in that drug utilization review part of it. And so for me, I feel like assessing whether or not the patient has adequate access or if they need a refill or if they need additional supply. And so I think this is not legal.
Right. Good comments. Okay, let's pass it down to here.
Here it says it was like at least 30 prescriptions over a 2-year span, and because it was that many, I feel like you should have noted that there was more filling than it should have been, or should have been regulated.
Okay.
I also think that the pharmacist is at fault as well as the physician for writing that many prescriptions, and the pharmacist for not noticing that there is definitely oversupply to the patient.
Okay, a quick summary. Great comments. Quick summary. These are my points that I would summarize the excellent comments that have been made here. First of all, The pharmacy appears not to have been monitoring the adherence, which is part of DUR, monitoring the adherence. They appeared not to have done that because they were refilling these prescriptions before the patient should have used all the medication. The second point is that this case, and I already said this, I just said it before, this case does prove, as we've said many times, the variability in court decisions. You know, one court said, yeah, we agree that they did it legally, they gave out, you know, money, the drugs that are on valid prescriptions, so they don't need to do anything more than that, but the appeals court questioned that. The next point is that the original circuit court decision, where they dismissed the case, the original decision was based on what I would call a pre-1980s view of the profession, that all we had to do was get, you know, the right number of pills in the bottle for a legal prescription, and we didn't have to do anything more than that. But that's not the view of the profession most people would have, and that I think most of you would have. This case was ultimately settled out of court. It turns out that it was settled out of court ultimately. So the pharmacy or the pharmacist, whoever was being sued, got the message that they were going to get into trouble, they better settle. The stakeholders, we always are interested in who the stakeholders were. I would say the stakeholders would be the deceased patient, certainly. The deceased patient would be the stakeholder. His family. The pharmacist involved would be a stakeholder. The pharmacy owner, or, you know, if it was a chain or whatever, it would be the corporation. And the physician, to some extent, the physician would be a stakeholder as well. The ethical principles here, I think, would primarily be the old, you know, standards of beneficence, non-maleficence, those two that go together, beneficence and non-maleficence, and very much related to what we talk about in ethics of the pharmacist's duty to warn, the pharmacist's duty to warn. Obviously, the pharmacist failed here in the duty to warn. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, we thank you guys very much, and Dr. Kuzmov will call up the next group for case 7.
Okay, so case 7, we have Claire Chen, Brianna DeVee, Richard Breen, Kendra Hung, Charlotte Murad, Angelica Charnowski, and Tu Trong.
Please check in with
Is this your cousin?
Dr. Kuzmov.
Is that Shukla?
Okay, let's have one of the members of the group read the question. Do you want to do that?
Good job, Seth. Look what you did.
Italy, a 73-year-old retired teacher who taught English at school for many years, is a regular patient at the local Walgreens pharmacy, where Seth Shukla is one of the pharmacists. Ms. Dilly particularly likes to have Seth fill her prescriptions because he had been a student in her senior English class, and she always reminded him that he was a good writer. Anne had a hypertension problem that was finally brought under control with Diovan and chlorthalidone. Seth had reminded her when she had her last refills that she would need new prescriptions the next time, but Seth assured her that he would contact her physician to get the necessary authorizations. When Anne came in to pick up her prescriptions, she greeted Seth warmly and chatted with him briefly. Upon checking the prescriptions that Seth gave her, however, she became quite agitated and began protesting rather loudly that Seth had given her the wrong medicine for her Diovan. Seth calmly explained that Diovan had recently become available as a generic and that state regulations required him to dispense the generic because her doctor had not specifically insisted on the brand. Before he could explain that her insurance would no longer cover the cost of the brand and that it would cost her a lot of money, she threw the prescription on the counter and loudly and excitedly demanded that Seth give her the right medicine immediately. Seth knew that Anne was on a very limited budget and could hardly afford the nominal copay that the generic would require. He also believed that the generic valsartan was equally effective as Diovan, just as the generic chlorthalidone that Anne had been getting all along had been effective. What are Seth's options in this case, and what are the legal and ethical considerations? How would you handle the situation?
Okay, let's share the mic and let everybody make a comment. Okay, Richard?
Legally, Seth is required to dispense the generic unless she requests the brand, but he should be doing his best to calm her down first and explain what happened.
So I agree with Richard in that he should empathize with the patient. But first, there seems like a large misunderstanding here of what she understands as generic and brand. Maybe after he calms down, you could explain that to her, and then also talk through her about the price.
I agree that it's part of his duty to dispense the generic since it's cheaper. However, he could help handle the situation by calming her down, reiterating this is what he needs to do, as well as contacting her doctor and asking him for a prescription.
Because it's unlikely he's going to be able to totally calm her down right here and now, and he may have to give her the more expensive product, and she'll have to pay for it, obviously. But in time, you know, when she's a little calmer, he could then perhaps approach her again. And if that doesn't work, getting the doctor to try to talk to her as well. If she hears it from both parties, she might ultimately become convinced. Any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything was basically said. But I think the biggest thing is to just maybe give her the price comparison between the two. Like, he knows that she's on a limited budget, again, once she's
Right,
calm.
and that's the ethical issue there. You know, he knows she's on a limited budget, and so he can't just let it go and say, well, too bad for her. If she doesn't want to listen, you know, her problem. Go ahead.
Since she's an older patient, he could probably help her next time, like next year comes around, pick a Medicare plan or some kind of insurance plan that would suit her needs if that's not being covered.
Good.
Well, basically everything was really said, but maybe if she wasn't satisfied with like not getting like the brand, not being able to get the brand, that maybe there's an application that he could suggest possibly, or just really honestly just say the price to make the would calm down.
Yeah, okay. All right, very good. Let me give some quick summary points. First of all, the pharmacist has to remain calm in cases like this, and these cases come up. The pharmacist can't also get excited and start arguing and you know, losing it too, so that's important. Also, you certainly would try to reason with her, but if she's too upset and you see that isn't going to work right at the point, just fill the prescription with the Diovan, and she'll have to pay, you know, whatever the copay is for that, the higher copay. And then, you know, when she's calmer, he can have in his mind that he's going to contact her again. It was already mentioned, possibly having her doctor talk to her as well if she's not able to just, you know, yield to the recommendation that the pharmacist is making. You have to be a little bit careful there. I think talking to her doctor would not be a violation of patient confidentiality. But some might suggest, for example, why not talk to a family member? Maybe she has, you know, a family member who could talk some sense into her head. I don't think you could go there because that would be a violation of patient confidentiality. But with the doctor, it would probably be okay. The ethical principles here, I want to introduce a new principle we haven't mentioned before, a principle called distributive justice. Distributive justice. Justice is an ethical principle, but distributive justice is more specific to this case. It has to do with making limited drugs or, you know, costly drugs available to as many people who need them as possible. And so he's trying to work with this principle of distributive justice to get her to get a medication that she can afford. The other ethical principle here is veracity or truth-telling that we mentioned last time. And that is that he needs to explain that the generics will, in most cases, work just as well. Other ethical principles would again be beneficence, you know, for the patient. And another ethical principle that we probably haven't specifically mentioned is the principle of autonomy. And autonomy means that even if this patient is wrong and you know, is making the wrong decision here, if she absolutely doesn't want the generic, period, she has the autonomous right to do that. So you would have to honor that ultimately as an ethical principle of the patient's autonomy, even if you don't agree with it. And then one final ethical principle here, I think, would be empathy. Empathy. Putting yourself into the shoes of this patient who's on a very limited budget. And the pharmacist did that. Obviously, he did that. So the stakeholders here are the patient, the pharmacist, and the doctor. The patient, the pharmacist, and the doctor. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this case? Seeing none, we'll move to case 8.
Okay, so for case number 8, we have Dana Chippy, Hannah Kim, So-Yoon Kim,
Thank you, guys.
Mary Nguyen, Sung Young Park, Brenda Yuan, Winnie Zhu.
I don't want to study Miro.
That's what I think.
You want to eat something after this? He's gonna cook. We gotta set a date for the. Yeah.
Mary French was the pharmacist on duty at the Rite Aid Pharmacy in North Brunswick, where she had been working for the past 2 years since her graduation from pharmacy school. At around 9:15 on a Saturday morning, 2 teenagers, a young lady and a young man, nervously approached the pharmacy counter. They looked a little disheveled and confused. In a voice that portrayed embarrassment, the young lady asked the pharmacist where they could find a product called Plan B One Step. The pharmacist knew that the product was available on an OTC basis at the store, and it was apparent to her that the young couple had already engaged in unprotected sex and wanted an emergency contraceptive. However, Mary was a religious person who believed that both premarital sex and the use of emergency contraceptives were sinful. She especially resented and opposed the purchase of these products by teenagers. Impulsively, Mary told the couple that they did not have any such products at the store, and when they asked her where they could find the product, she simply indicated that she did not know. The two left the store with concerned looks on their faces. Mary wondered if she had done the right thing. Please summarize the professional, legal, and/or ethical issues that are involved here. Was the pharmacist within her rights?
Okay, please pass the mic around, and who wants to?
She was definitely not within her rights because we have a professional duty to do the best for our patients, and that's regardless of any personal beliefs we hold. And I don't remember the name of the law, but there is a law that we have to provide things like birth control, even if we don't agree with it. So by her lying, she's not okay.
Yeah, you really summarized it pretty well. You know, there are people who have strong feelings who would disagree with you. I happen to agree with you, but you know, there are a few who might not. Go ahead.
So she denied them the healthcare product, and as a healthcare practitioner, she should be looking out for the patient and for their well-being. And this is something they probably feel that they really need to improve their quality of life. And I think ethically and legally, she shouldn't have done the denial of the product.
Yeah, I also agree. I believe this was unethical of the pharmacist to impede the teenagers from getting the product that they wanted and that they potentially needed for their situation.
The pharmacist might think it was her right to give the patient the medication, but at the same time, she was violating the patient right to get the medication.
I also agree with everything that was said before, and also I feel like she was a little bit prejudiced because she said that she especially resented and opposed the purchase of the products by teenagers, so just because they're young, she might have been more inclined to lie to them.
So pharmacists do have right to refuse to, that's only when it's gonna protect the patient. So instead of lying, she could have just referred to pharmacy or other technicians.
Okay, all really good comments. Let me quickly summarize, to put it all sort of together. The ethical principles involved here, I think you would note them. Veracity, obviously she lies, so veracity. Empathy, also called sometimes compassion, so related to compassion. She was not really empathizing with the plight or the situation that these kids were in. Also autonomy. I mean, you know, she was replacing her view to the right of these kids to decide what they were going to take. Although, you know, you could also argue that the pharmacist maybe had autonomy in wanting to deny them. And also the principle of non-maleficence. I mean, non-maleficence to particularly the female patient here who maybe, you know, with an unwanted pregnancy could have some health issues associated with that. The stakeholders I think are the pharmacist, obviously the two teenagers, Rite Aid, which could end up getting sued. Maybe it's unlikely in this case because these teenagers might not have the moxie to do something like that, although their families might at some point. So Rite Aid could get into trouble here if they had documentation as to what really had occurred here, and unless these kids had a recorder on them, you might not have that. Other stakeholders would be the families of the teenagers and the profession to some extent. That we don't want to be a profession that uses lies like that to point out our own preferences. There could be legal jeopardy for Rite Aid in a case like this. We pointed that out. And just finally, courts, although things can go either way, courts have ruled that pharmacists cannot prevent patients from obtaining legal products based on their religious or personal views. That courts have ruled that. That's been most of the court cases that have come up like this have ruled that way, that we don't really have that right, although some may feel differently. And in the current administration, President Trump has made comments that he would like to see laws put into effect that would give healthcare professionals the right to refuse to do whatever they don't believe in. So obviously you can see divergences of opinions here based on one's political leanings. Any other comments or questions about this? Okay, well, thank you guys very much, and let's go to case 9.
Okay, so case 9, we have Evelyn Abramson, Laura Hahn, Mackenzie Henderson, Savage I can't say that last name. Jacob Brzezinski, Victoria Rotondi, and Jae-Yoon Shin.
Yeah, while we're assembling the group here, I just want to comment that given the recent proposed merger of companies like CVS and Aetna, CVS taking over Aetna, and Cigna taking over Express Scripts, and those kinds of mergers that are occurring, I think that this case, as it's described here, has particular relevance to what we're going to be encountering, in the immediate future. So, who wants to read the case? Okay. Who's going to read it? All right, let's have a volunteer read the case, please.
Okay, James Chen, Form D, BCPS, is the district pharmacist at a major health insurance company. Is now part of a major national chain pharmacy and PBM. James is responsible for making the decision as to whether his company will cover the new PCSK9 inhibitors, Elarosumab and Epilumuz. The next one. The cost of these products ranges from $7,000 to $12,000 per year. The top management of the health insurance company has informed James that they estimate that adding these drugs will increase the per month premium cost by as much as $50 per insured individuals, and this will make the company less competitive with their clients, most of which are large corporations who are very concerned about the escalating costs of the health benefits they provide for their employees. James senses that management prefers that these drugs not be included in the list of products that should be included in the company's formulary. James realizes that he must present a summary of pros and cons to the formulary committee. He wonders how he can carry out the wishes of his management team while being faithful to his ethical responsibilities to the insured patient, as well as to the physicians and other professionals who make up the company's formulary committee. What are the pros and cons that James should present to the formulary committee, and what are the ethical responsibilities involved here? What options does James have here?
All right, let's just pass it around to hear whatever initial comments you guys have on this case.
I think James should, during the meeting with the formulary committee, he should list the advantages of using the newly approved drugs, like their better efficacy or things like that, and also remind the committee of their roles as healthcare professionals to do the best for their patients.
Okay. All right, other comments?
I agree with that. I think, particularly with PCSK9 inhibitors, they're the most effective drugs we have for lowering LDL, and for a lot of people with like homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. These are really the most effective drugs, so those people really need them. So that's something that they could definitely talk about when they're talking about this, and I think that just focusing on money for the health insurance company and making them less competitive, I don't think that's a good enough reason to say that.
I agree with what was said. Yeah, obviously they'd have to go over objectively how efficacious it is for patients, and the con would have they would have to go over the costs. Just
Okay, thank you. You didn't get a chance to comment about it?
No. I think one of the cons of this drug is the cost, high cost, and the insurance must cover this cost for the patients to ensure best health care for the patients. So that's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that was said. Just for the meeting, look at everything objectively and see how much less competitive the company would look like if you increased it by $50 and what the other options would be.
Okay, last one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the pros and cons should be weighed out, and the health of the patient should come first before business.
All well stated. Quick summary. The pros are that this drug is, as you pointed out, is valuable and life-saving in some cases where patients can't be controlled with statin drugs for the reasons mentioned up here. Some patients, it's a minority of patients, clearly can't be controlled on statin drugs alone. Another pro is that that's a relatively small subset of the population. Not everybody is in that category, but there are a few who can't be controlled. The con, as was pointed out well by your fellow students here,